Hello folks, welcome to the Canal Channel Jose. Today we're going to give you an idea how to adjust the valves on your air-cooled engine Volkswagen Karmann Ghia, and that way you get an idea how we did it, so that way you don't have to take it to shops and you can do it at home and save a lot of money. Well, that's it. Let's jump right into it. So to adjust the valves on our air-cooled engine 1600, what we're going to be doing is we have two brand new gaskets for the valve covers in case those valve covers, once we take them off, the gaskets tear or break. We have new ones to go in. And another thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be using a socket with a ratchet to take off the spark plugs on all cylinders. So we disconnect the wires, take the spark plugs out. So when we are rotating by hand the engine, there's no compression buildup, so we can spin it easily. So that way we can get to every single piston top dead center to adjust the valves on that piston as we need to move on. So that's the reason we're going to take the spark plugs out. So then don't lose the sequence where the wires go connected to the spark plug. So that way you can connect it back to it and there's no misfire. We're going to be using a flathead screwdriver, a 13mm wrench, and we're going to be using our gauge to 6/1000. That's what we're going to be using. So 0.006. So we're going to be using that to adjust the gap on the valves. So with that, let's start taking out the spark plugs off. So the firing order on this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to start on the passenger side front piston valves, which is going to be the piston number 1 valves. That's we're going to start adjusting that. Once we finish that, we move to the back one. Once we adjust that, we put that new gasket, cover it up, and then we move to the driver's side front piston, which is the number 3 piston. And once we finish that, then we move to the last one, which is the rear driver's side. That's the last piston that we're going to be adjusting the valves on. So 1, 2, 3, 4. When you're taking the spark plugs out, make sure that you don't let it drop, because this gap right here has to be calibrated and you don't want it to drop it and then put it on. Then you're going to have problems with misfire. Put them on a safe side, so when you put them on, they're calibrated. Now that we have removed the 4 spark plugs, 2 from one side and 2 from the other side, what we're going to be doing is that's going to help us rotate the engine by hand, and there's not going to be compression buildup on the cylinders. So we have the mark here. This is a low point. There's a point here, and that has to line up on the top dead center, what it's called. And we're going to have to take the rotor cap off to make sure that the rotor is pointing to piston number 1. And when this is up right here and that's pointing to piston number 1, then we can start adjusting the valves on piston number 1. Now we can take the cover off and we can take this off to make sure it's going to be pointing towards piston number 1. We put this oil pan in case there's something in there and it drops into it. So now if the cover don't want to come off because it's stuck, don't force it just at one spot. You want to get it to loosen all the way around because it's probably been there for so long. So don't just shove a screwdriver in one point and start bending that cover, because then you're going to have problems sealing back up. So just take your time on splitting that now, because all it is just stuck to it. In our case, this one has silicone as well, so we're going to clean all this out so we can put a brand new gasket in there. And this probably is going to be damaged if we try to put it back in, and it's not going to seal. We have the valves exposed for piston number 1 and number 2, and what we're going to be doing is we have to put the pulley to top depth center for number 1 piston, and once we put that, we're going to verify it on the distributor that the rotor is pointing to the piston number 1. When you're doing this or spinning your engine by hand, not just because you took the spark plugs out, there's no compression. Another thing is you want to take it out of gear and leave it in neutral, because you're going to be turning the transaxle as well. So now we point it straight up, top dead center, piston number 1. So now our valves right there are ready to be adjusted. So now we get our gauge and we slide it between 6 thousandths. Okay, this one is a little loose. This one a little loose too, so we need to tighten them a little bit. Not too, you want to tighten them where this feels a little drag, but it doesn't get caught in there. So we're gonna be loosening the nut and then turn it with the flathead screwdriver to adjust while the gauge is in there. And then once we get the right amount of friction, then we can tighten the nut so that way everything stays in place. Now we have the right amount of space, so we're gonna tighten that nut by holding the center screw as well. So now we adjusted piston number 1, now we adjust piston number 2. So now to adjust these two valves, what we have to do is now we have to come over and turn this pulley. So that mark that it was for piston number 1, that mark has to turn 180 all the way to the bottom, straight down. So then the rotor is going to be pointing at piston number 2, which is next. So now our pulley, the mark is straight down. The rotor's pointing to number 2 piston. And now our valves need to be clear. They don't have they're not gonna have any tension. Now we can put our gauge in there and see the clearance. This one feels good. This one feels a little loose. So we already adjusted this side. So what we're gonna have to do is clean all the silicone around. So when we put the new gasket in, all this is gonna seal right. So now we grab our cover and our new gasket, put it over, put it in, and then flip the locking device so we can put it back in. Now we have done this side. We put the valve cover back on with a brand new gasket. We come over to the other side. We take the valve cover off and we'll start with the piston number 3 valves. So once we took the valve cover off, we clean it. We're going to take out the old gasket, clean around, and then adjust the valves so we can put the brand new gasket with a valve cover on and put it on. So now to adjust the number 3 piston valves, what we have to do is we have to come over to the crankshaft or the pulley, the mark that we put down for the piston number 2. Now we have to turn it 180 and bring it back up to the top dead center, and we got to make sure that the rotor points to number 3 piston. So then we can start putting our gauge into those valves and see the clearance. So now our mark is back up to where in the top dead center for number 3 piston, and we're gonna be going in because the rotor is pointing at number 3 piston already. Grab our gauge and we put it between the valves. That's good. And that's good. So to adjust the number 4 piston valves, we're gonna have to bring the mark downwards again, and we're gonna make sure the rotor is pointing towards piston number 4 wire. So then we can start putting our gauge in there. So our mark is down. Rotor's pointing to the number 4 piston. So now let's see with our gauge how much clearance we have. So let's try this one. This one feels good. Let's try this other one. This feels a little loose, so we're gonna adjust this one. To adjust it, we loosen that nut, and then we turn our screw with the screwdriver, and then we put our filler gauge in there to see how much clearance. So we turn it until we start having some grab a little bit. So then we can hold the center screw with the screwdriver, and then we can turn our nut to tighten it, so that way we can get the right adjustment. So now we have adjusted the valves for both sides. So now what we have to do is we just clean all the way around here, the edge where the seal, the new gasket is gonna fall in. So that way it makes a good contact and seals good. And then we put the cover back on. And not all valves needed adjustment. There was about 3 of them that needed a small amount of adjustment. So now we grab our brand new gasket, we put it on the valve cover and put it on. So now that we have the valve covers back on, everything's calibrated. We put the spark plugs back on, connect the wires, put the rotor cap back on, and turn on our engine. So now that we have put all 4 spark plugs back on, and the reason we took them off is so we could spin the engine by hand and it wouldn't build compression, so that will rotate easy. And plus, being a neutral, the engine will just rotate slowly and taking our time. We were able to adjust this side, and then we went to that side because the way the rotor was spinning counterclockwise. So we were following the pistons as the rotor was spinning as well. And well, folks, hopefully this video was useful and helpful on how to adjust the valves on an air-cooled engine. And pretty much it's pretty simple. The only thing that we recommend is that you get a brand new gaskets for around the valve cover. So in case the old one breaks, you have a new one that you can put in there. And then the tools are pretty basic. It's just a gauge, 6,000 gauge, and a flathead screwdriver, a 13mm wrench to loosen the nut. And then we took the spark plugs out, so we were able to rotate the engine without creating compression, and then putting the transaxle and neutral, so that way we can help rotate the engine as well. That way, if you need to do adjustment on the valves, you can do it at home and not take it to shops and pay a lot of money. So with that said, folks, for friends who are watching a video, have you subscribed to our channel? Please subscribe. If you like a video, give us thumbs up, share it, and we'll see you soon with more videos here in the canal del Chano Jose.